Let's talk starting a podcast in private practice. Hi, I'm Kat from catlove.com, and today my guest is Melvin Varghese. Melvin is the founder of the Selling the Couch podcast, which you can find at sellingthecouch.com. The podcast helps mental health private practitioners learn the business, marketing, and social media skills they didn't learn in school. After having so much success with his podcast, Melvin started the Healthcasters, the #1 course and community for health, wellness, and fitness podcasters. Today, Melvin shares his enthusiasm with us for podcasting and gives us his insights on how you might be able to get started. We discuss what makes podcasting so awesome for therapists, the fears we need to overcome in order to start podcasting, how to manage tech overwhelm when you are first starting out, stories of several therapists who have made an impact with their podcast, and one thing you can do right now to move towards starting a podcast. Let's talk. Hey Melvin, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hey, Kat, it's really good to connect, and I've always cherished our friendship a lot, so I'm grateful to
Aw,
be here.
yay. I have to ask you about podcasting. You
Mm.
have this amazing podcast yourself called Selling the Couch, and you also are helping therapists learn how to use podcasting as a form of content marketing for their businesses. And I was wondering, why did you become so passionate about podcasting, and why do you think that it's something that a therapist should consider doing?
Yeah, I mean, those are great questions. So I think, why did I become passionate about podcasting? Well, I'm not a big video person, and so I just thought, and I like writing, but I just thought, for most of us as clinicians, the ability to speak probably comes most naturally to us. And so I thought, instead of me try to go into a medium that I wasn't comfortable with, why not work within my strengths? And so that, I think, is where the idea of starting a podcast came from. I thought that I could work within my strengths. I could also help a lot of people in that way. I also noticed, like, just in general, podcasting is such a new medium. And because of that, it's not a very like saturated space, but it's rapidly growing. So I just thought that might be kind of a unique way, to help others. One Podcasts are pretty unique for a couple of reasons, but one of the big reasons is they don't force you to give up something in order to listen to them, right? Which is very unique compared to other type of mediums. So, meaning that you can listen to a podcast and be watching your kid play on a playground, or you could be on a hike and listen to a podcast. You could be on a commute and listen to a podcast, right? That's a little bit more challenging with some of the other medium. Like, you probably shouldn't be watching a video while driving or
Yeah.
something, you know. Um, but uh, but yeah, just that ability to do something and still listen to a podcast and consume content, that I think spoke to me. And a lot of folks are now, I think the stats are something like 64% of listeners now listen to podcasts on either a smartphone or a tablet. And so a lot of folks are listening with these earbuds, right? So I mean, you're literally in the ears of folks that are in front of clients, or in front of your ideal clients. So
Wow, yeah, that's so awesome. Yeah, definitely don't want to watch a video while you're driving, or read a blog post, which is another very common form of content marketing. So the audio definitely has an advantage there. And I love what you said about like how it's so new, it's new, it's a new form, and that means that there's probably a lot of opportunity to get your podcast out there and heard. So that's so exciting. Um, I know that you're also teaching therapists how to start podcasts. Have you seen therapists have any kind of fears about putting themselves out there? I know I see that with blogging. I also see that definitely with video. And I'm wondering, is it the same with podcasting? Are there any fears that a therapist would have to kind of overcome to get to that place where they're starting a podcast?
yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned those two other medium, because I think the same fears that come up in those medium are the same things that come up for a podcast. I think one of the most common ones, and this is something I struggled with, and when I speak to other podcasters that are therapists as well, they talk about this, which is that they just never envisioned their career beyond a certain geographic area. Whereas now, podcasts are global. I mean, they're truly global now. Like, just to give some context, like my podcast, I think I looked at some stats now. It's listened to in 70 countries, in over 70 countries, in every continent except Antarctica, which is crazy, right? Like, I'm in a home office recording this in Philadelphia, uh, and so I think just that sort of mental hurdle, like, who am I to be able to share my voice in the world? There's this really good quote that I love, that it's on my wall a lot, and I share with my podcasters, which is, we all have a perspective or a voice to share and a people to serve, you know.
Mm.
And I think that once I think all of us get to a point in our careers where we do want to make a bigger impact in the world. Not saying that seeing clients is not making a big impact, because it is, of course, but being able to realize that we have such a unique skill set and we have passions, and that at the end of our life we can do something with our lives that makes such a big impact in the world. And then at the end of our lives we can look back and say, we did something, like, we didn't live a life of regret, you know. I think that's what it has been for me. It's not just launching a podcast, but having the courage to find your voice. Sorry, I'm getting a little
Aw,
emotional with it, but I
yeah.
think
No,
uh,
totally.
there's no, like, for me, like, there's no rational reason. I'm pretty introverted. I think my wife is making me a little bit more extroverted, but uh, like, there's no rational reason why I should have launched a podcast. I always imagined starting a small private practice in here in Philadelphia, just kind of staying in my geographic area. But I don't know. There was some part of me, I just wanted to make a bigger impact, and I think that's what a lot of people want to do, and not in like an arrogant way, but just because we realize we have abilities and we have our training and all of these things that can help a lot of people.
Yeah, but at the same time, that's also a fear.
Mhm.
So it's like a desire and a fear simultaneously.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's exactly right. I think one big thing I've learned is that the best things in life happen when we get to the edge of what's comfortable and what's not familiar. And I think a lot of times we get to that edge, and for me, like, a lot of my life, I would get to that edge and then I just pull back to what was safe. But it's that space between, that's where the magic happens.
Oh, I love that. And I know from my work with websites with therapists that there's also kind of some trepidation around the technology piece of stuff like this. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I'm wondering, like, if someone is, getting interested in podcasting, hearing about all of the awesome possibilities with it, what should they, I mean, like, how can they approach the technological side of podcasting and not get overwhelmed and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the technology overwhelm is real, right? It's very scary. I think so. When I first started my podcast, I had never edited audio before. I had never done like a radio interview or anything like that, and I was like, how in the world am I going to figure all this stuff out? But I'm a big believer in keeping it simple. I think especially sometimes in this online space, like, podcasts are starting to become very mainstream, and in some ways they're starting to replace radio as we know it, right? um, but I think because of in this space, I think there's sort of this gear envy that can come up, like, I need to get this microphone which costs $400, or I need to get this headphone, in order to start my podcast. But I like to keep it really simple. So, I mean, I can even explain. So, this is actually the mic that I use for my podcast. It costs around $70 on Amazon. It's what I've used for over 100 episodes now. And it just plugs directly into a laptop. And then I usually use Skype. We're using Skype right now. So I'll call folks on Skype, and then I use this piece of software. I have a Mac, so I use a program called Ecamm Call Recorder, which actually records our conversation. And then I take it into this program called Audacity, which is free. And then you can just edit the audio. that way. But
It's so
yeah,
funny because I have all the same things running and I also use Audacity too. So yeah, I have the same microphone. I have the same call recorder eCam. So yeah, but yeah, these are very simple. I mean, I think eCam costs maybe like $20 or
yeah,
it's not very expensive. So these are all low cost tools.
yeah. Well, and I think the other thing also to realize, like editing is usually the part that intimidates a lot of
Mm,
podcasters. So I think it makes sense to launch a podcast when you're at a place in your career, in your private practice where um, you have a stable private practice, but now you want to either create additional income streams or you want to scale your practice in some way, right? So because of that, like I actually think it's smart if you can just you can outsource the editing part of it, that you can find folks on, websites like Upwork. That's a common one. Podcasts, because I think podcasts are getting more mainstream. There's a lot of podcast editors, and they're reasonably priced, anywhere from 25 to 45 dollars an episode, which is, especially when you're thinking about the amount of people that are listening to podcasts. We haven't really gotten much of these stats, but there's some pretty crazy stats. Like right now here in the US, there's 57 million people that are listening per month to podcasts. So that's about 21% of the entire US population, which
that's
is
amazing.
crazy, right? Like, to put that in context, like 13% use Spotify to
Mhm.
listen to music, 21% also use Twitter. So basically the same number of people using Twitter every month are listening to podcasts as well. So percentage wise.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you would never. I mean, I think, like, when I was looking at some of the stats, like 2013, it was like 12%, right? So it was around what, 29 million, 30 million, something around there. So I mean, the last 5 years, the amount of folks listening to podcasts has steadily increased, and a lot of the data that I've looked at is just well into the next decade. It's going to. I mean, it makes sense in many ways, right? Because if you look at just media in general, like we have things like Netflix, it's all about on demand, right? So it makes sense that everything is going on demand, right? So it makes sense that audio would also go on demand.
Yeah, no, totally. And are is there a certain platform that people are going to look for podcasts? Is that iTunes or are there other things out there that if someone was going to start a podcast, they would need to be
Mhm.
on?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're there's two big ones. So like iTunes is the big
Hmm.
one if you're an Apple user. So you actually, you have the iTunes logo on any Apple device. But then Google actually just came out this year and they said they're going to start supporting podcasts. So you can also put your podcasts on Google Play. There's actually more Android users than Apple users in the world, which I didn't know for a long time. But Apple's doing their marketing. So, but what that means is, I mean, that's a good chunk of people. I was looking at some other stats. They said 70% of the world by 2020 will have access to a smartphone, which is insane, right? Like, that's like, I mean, I forgot what the exact 6.1 billion people, and it's around 2.2 right now. So basically, it's going to 3x here in the next 4 years. So there's a lot of potential, I think, with this medium in specific. So,
Right. And something that stands out to me is it sounds like the growth is so rapid too. Like, just in the last 5 years, went from 13% to 20. So
mhm,
like that's amazing. And it
mhm.
seems like it's just keeps going up.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense because I think it's the smartphone
Yeah.
sort of, right? The smartphone is becoming the new laptop in many ways for folks. So I think the portability of podcasts plus the portability of a smartphone, it's a nice combo. You can, I can't tell you the amount of colleagues that have said, "Oh, I love listening to a podcast on this and this topic." Like if you love learning, right? I mean, podcasts are such a cool medium to be able to find any topic that you like and to hear a different perspective on that. So,
Ah, it's so exciting. And I I know that because you're in this space with podcasting and teaching podcasting, that do you have any success stories that you could share with us? Like, do you know of any therapists that went from not podcasting to the process of learning, setting up, launching a podcast, and then have experienced something positive in their private practice due
Yeah.
to having a podcast? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got several stories, but
Ooh.
I'll try to be I'll try to be brief. So like the first one is Jackie Flynn, who has a podcast called Parenting in the Range. So she's a play therapist based in Florida, and she wanted to create a podcast to help parents and talk about just a real conversations on what it's like to be on parenting and what it's like to be a parent. So she launched her podcast now. That's been able, so she's been able to use that podcast. So what she does is it's actually really smart because we actually have someone else doing this too, which is she's connecting with local contacts and having them also on her podcast, which
Mm.
then is a great way to build relationships with folks, right? So that's helping her private practice. But she actually is now launching a membership community for play therapists and using her podcast as a medium to connect with play therapists because she began to realize there's a lot of play therapists that are listening, and so that's how she's sort of making that transition. I know you and I both know Laura Reagan. Laura is out in Baltimore. She's a wonderful therapist. She's become a good friend. She has a podcast called Therapy Chat, which she talks about sort of things like perfectionism and fear and doubt and all of those things that we can struggle with. And she's using that to grow out her practice. She's actually just created a community for trauma-based therapists, and so she's doing a lot of stuff with that. And I'm just kind of thinking offhand. Robin Rocket is actually someone that I don't know if you guys have connected, but she's a clinician. Her practice is working with single parents. She's also a single mom, and now she has a podcast called Single Parent Life, which is all about navigating the journey of being a single parent. So, like, we're about to approach Thanksgiving here in the US. And so, like, one of her recent podcasts are going to be on how do you navigate holidays, being a single parent and things like that. So, she's got some plans out to build a membership community as well. I think possibly a course. So, we've had some pretty neat stuff. I can probably go on. Robert Cox is another person. He's an addiction specialist out in um, uh, Missouri, I want to say. Sorry, Robert, if I got that wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's Missouri. Uh, but he's, his podcast is on the intersection of addiction and mindfulness. So he's now writing for the Huffington Post. He told me recently that Pessy has reached out to him to do more talks around the country. He's actually in the process of creating a course for a course at the intersection of autism and trauma, and is now using the podcast as a way to share that course and to create some additional income streams as well.
It's amazing. This is so
Yeah.
exciting. And I love hearing about kind of what you were saying earlier, of how starting a podcast can help you grow and move you into another income stream, or, as you mentioned, membership site, selling courses, getting yourself into the media. These are
Mhm.
all great benefits of just putting yourself out there. Um, One thing I like to ask at the end of these videos is if you can narrow your narrow things down into one actionable step that someone watching this video could take if they want to start podcasting in their private practice, what would that one thing be?
I would say this is more of a mental thing,
Mm.
but don't let the sort of thing to get it perfect stop you from launching a podcast. Like if you look at my first like several episodes, I mean, I cringe, uh,
Oh, I love
because
those. Didn't you do one with Corey Bank
yeah,
in the
I did.
beginning? That one was good. I liked it.
It was good, but it was just I remember just being so scared, and
Oh.
even those initial ones, like my voice was so shaky. It's still a little bit shaky, but my voice was so shaky, and but I think the thing is, if I had just I felt so much fear back then, and if I had just felt that fear and not taken action, like I know I STC wouldn't be where it is now. Uh, But I think that's the thing. It's very similar to when we're first seeing our first mock client, in grad school. It's the same thing with a podcast. You're not going to get it right the first time. That's okay. We're not aiming for like NPR quality, but what we're doing is we all have this message to share, and we're trying to put that out into the world. And the other stuff will come with time. You'll get better at interviewing, you'll get better with the technology, but that I think a lot of times folks feel that fear, and then they're like, I don't want to do that. But that's it's such a disservice, because I think so many of us in the field are so talented, and we have such enormous perspectives, and yeah, and our voice needs to get out into the world for sure.
That's so awesome. So, where can people find you, your podcast, and your Healthcasters course?
Yeah, of course. So you can find me at sellingthecouch.com. You can go to sellingthecouch.com/the Healthcasters to learn more about the Healthcasters. I also do very regular, like free podcasting workshops where we can break down a lot of this technology, and I can share some more stats and things like that. You can find that at sellingthecouch.com/podcasting workshop.
Awesome. I will include all of the links in the blog post and the YouTube description for people to click on. And I just want to thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I love talking about podcasting. I just think, there's so much potential there, and it's exciting to be able to see how it can really impact the world.
Yay! I agree. Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome, Kat. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. I
so love how Melvin shared his enthusiasm for podcasting with us today. To get notes and links from today's session, you can do so at catlove.com/session8. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.